My name is Sophia Samper, and this is my Plurilingual Journey. I was born in Ottawa. My dad is from Loretteville, a small suburb outside of Quebec City, and speaks Joual, or a type of Quebecois French. He met my mother traveling from Alaska to Tierra del Fuego. My mother is from Bogota, Colombia, and speaks Spanish. My brother and I were cared for by a Jamaican nanny who would even take me home with her when I was an infant. When I was 3 years old, we all moved to Jakarta, Indonesia, unfortunately leaving Althea behind. My dad and my mother divorced soon after, and my dad traveled the world for his work. I became fluent in Bahasa Indonesia, and apparently I even spoke Javanese, the language of the Indonesian royalty. I spent all my time at home with my Indonesian nanny, Sunarti. In Indonesia, I also started my lifelong passion for ballet and also Balinese dancing. My brother and I would sing along to the call for prayer as it would ring out through the city around us. I still find this to be a comforting sound. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. In Jakarta, I also took private French lessons. We moved back to Ottawa when I was going into grade 1, and I started schooling in French immersion. My dad eventually also moved back to Canada, and Spanish became the secret language my parents spoke to each other when negotiating child custody matters. In grade 9, I moved to La Paz, Bolivia with my mother. Finally, I got the opportunity to learn Spanish and became quite fluent. We would often go visit Lake Titicaca in the Altiplano, and I became fascinated with mestizo culture, or the mixture of indigenous and colonial cultures, especially Cholita dress. I went to university in Montreal. I studied history and Hispanic literature. I worked my summers becoming quite bilingual in French and English. I often visited Spain and was fascinated with Islamic architecture. I even got to study in Spain during my undergraduate degree. For my joint honors thesis, I looked at and compared translation practices during the Spanish reconquest of the Iberian Peninsula and translation practices during the discovery of Latin America and the New World. When I graduated, I vowed I would never teach English overseas in order to avoid neocolonialism and cultural and linguistic hegemony. I also fell in love with a Turkish man and began studying Turkish formally and traveled around Turkey. I went on to pursue a master's degree in Brighton in the United Kingdom, the center of colonialism of the modern world. Then I moved to the occupied Palestinian territories, where I was privileged enough to work on cultural heritage of the Palestinian people. I started to learn some Arabic and learned words such as kifek, mihal, assalamu alaikum. Sometimes, crossing checkpoints, I would accidentally create shocked faces by saying shokran instead of toda to the IDF soldiers. Then I took a job in Winnipeg, Manitoba, where I came to appreciate Canadian Indigenous languages and cultures. It was in the midst of Idle No More, and I had the great privilege of conducting oral histories with Indigenous activists and musicians. Then I moved to Pakistan and worked in the northern areas, or at Gilgit-Baltistan, bordering on Afghanistan and China. There I learned my first words of Urdu and found them to be quite similar to words I had known in Turkish and Arabic. Most of my work was done with the translation of a fantastic colleague, Falak, much as was the case in my experience in the Palestinian territories. As you might be imagining, I was getting tired of moving around so much. I decided to resettle in Montreal because that's where I had some friends and rent was cheap. I worked in a social history museum where I worked bilingually, but my English wasn't really considered an asset and my French was under constant scrutiny. I have a light accent in French, and people told me they didn't like it. I only really felt comfortable and myself working in a public school with newcomer classes and also volunteering my time to tutor refugee and immigrant students. I started tutoring professionally, and some of my students were from China. Their mother asked if I would tutor family members back home who didn't have the opportunity to come to Canada. I was apprehensive to teach English and also apprehensive to teach online. Today, I actually have my own business teaching English and French to kids in China. It's heartbreaking when they tell me their favorite foods are hamburgers and pizza, or when they show me the gas masks they wear to protect them from the smog. My attitude has completely changed, and I see my online lessons as essential in giving these kids the skills they'll need to face the challenges of our world. In Montreal, I also met my current boyfriend, Yanni. He's from Israel and speaks Hebrew, so I've learned a bit through his family. His mother was Argentinian, so we also speak some Spanish to each other. I'm so excited to be in Toronto to continue my plurilingual journey.